Welcome to Mr. Hutchings' History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right. Hey, everyone, get ready because today we are diving deep into a real historical head-scratcher.
Ooh, I like it.
It's one that still gets people debating, President Kennedy's Alliance for Progress.
Right.
Now, you might think, oh, I know that one. Cold War, Latin America, tons of money thrown around.
Yeah, classic history stuff.
But stick with us, because even if you ace those history tests, there's always more to discover.
Always. Layers upon layers.
We're going deep into this fascinating lecture, actually one designed for high school students,
Oh, interesting.
which means it's packed with those juicy details that sometimes, get left out of the bigger picture.
I find those are always the best parts, the little things that really bring it to life.
Totally agree. So what makes the Alliance for Progress so fascinating, and you know this better than I do, is how it's this blend of idealism and, well, let's call it political reality.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there.
On the surface, it's all about pulling Latin America out of poverty, spreading democracy, and, hushing those communist whispers.
Right, very noble goals.
But then you start peeling back the layers and it gets complicated.
Absolutely. You find all these tangled threads of U.S. economic interests, Cold War anxieties, and honestly, some decisions that were, well, questionable.
Okay, so picture this. 1961. The Cuban Revolution is fresh, still rattling everyone in Washington.
Big time.
And Kennedy is staring down this possibility, this fear, that communism is going to sweep through Latin America like dominoes.
The Domino theory, yeah, it was a real concern back then.
And you've got all these countries in Latin America wrestling with poverty, inequality, political instability, fertile ground for, revolution.
Exactly, the perfect breeding ground for unrest.
So boom, here comes the Alliance for Progress. Kennedy unveils this ambitious plan, March 13th, promising billions in aid. Billions.
There was a huge commitment.
Over the next decade, to be precise.
And he wasn't just throwing money at the problem either.
Right, this wasn't a blank check. He wanted big changes, sweeping reforms, land redistribution, better education and healthcare, overhauling the tax systems, the whole 9 yards.
He really envisioned a total transformation of Latin America from the bottom up.
So was he this idealistic visionary, like genuinely committed to helping Latin America?
That's the question, isn't it?
Or is this calculated, a power move to secure U.S. influence, open up new markets, and, keep those Soviet boogeymen away?
It's hard to say for sure.
Because, let's be real, Latin America was strategically vital to the U.S., and still is.
No doubt about it. And to complicate things further, this is all happening in the thick of the Cold War.
Right. Every single move, every decision was seen through this lens of how do we contain communism?
It's like every action had this potential ripple effect,
It's almost like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded while juggling chainsaws.
A very vivid image.
But before we get lost in all that Cold War chaos, let's focus on a specific moment that set the stage for this whole experiment. The signing of the Pun Deesa Charter.
Ah, yes, the charter.
Now, it's more than just some old document gathering dust.
No, it's so much more than that.
It was this moment, at least on paper, of unity.
Like everyone coming together saying, we're in this together.
Every single Latin American country, except for Cuba, obviously.
Right. Of course, Cuba wasn't at the table.
They signed on, agreeing to hit specific targets for things like economic growth, literacy rates, you name it.
It was almost like this grand bargain. You make these changes, we'll provide the funds.
So did it work? Did this grand vision of development and democracy actually happen?
That's what we're here to find out.
Or did the Alliance for Progress become another one of those good intentions gone wrong stories?
Well, let's just say the results were a mixed bag.
Uh-oh.
Some countries did see real progress, economic growth, better living conditions, the whole deal. But for many others, the transformation they were promised never quite happened.
So it wasn't a simple success story.
Not quite. And then you have to factor in the unintended consequences, the political maneuvering, the compromises.
Sounds juicy.
This deep dive is about to get messy.
I love it when it gets messy.
So to really get why the alliance had, like, a mixed report card, we got to go beyond the big speeches and promises.
Right. Get into the weeds.
Exactly. See how things actually played out on the ground.
All right, let's put on our historian goggles. Where do we start untangling this web?
Okay, so one of the biggest hurdles the alliance faced was this constant push and pull between, wanting to help these countries develop and the U.S.'s own Cold War fears.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they were trying to build something solid, but on like a foundation that was always shaking.
Okay, I get that. So on one side, you've got Kennedy pushing for all these progressive changes, land redistribution, better social services, the whole shebang things that, honestly, could really improve people's lives.
Right, and the thinking was a happier populace is less likely to go for the communist stuff.
Makes sense. But then,
But then that fear of communism, man, it was like this trump card. Everything else came second. So you had the U.S. backing some pretty shady regimes, turning a blind eye to corruption, to human rights abuses, all because those regimes were firmly anti-communist.
it's almost like they were so focused on winning that Cold War chess match that they forgot the real people caught in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where those unintended consequences start popping up. Like, take industrialization. The alliance was all about it.
Sounds like a good thing, right? More factories, more jobs.
On paper, yeah. But what often happened was all the wealth ended up concentrated in the cities, while rural areas got left behind.
Ah, so instead of lifting everyone up, it actually made inequality worse in some places.
Sadly, yeah. It's like patching up one part of the roof while the whole foundation is crumbling.
Oof, not good.
And then you have the whole issue of economic dependency. Billions flowed into Latin America, sure, but
Right.
a lot of that cash ended up right back in U.S. pockets. Contracts for American companies, investments, that kind of thing.
So instead of helping these countries become more independent, it kind of chained them even closer to the U.S.
Yeah, a bit ironic, isn't it?
Totally. Any other examples of good intentions going a little sideways?
Oh, yeah. Some of the reforms they pushed, even something like minimum wage laws, sometimes backfired.
Really?
Yep. Led to higher unemployment in some countries because businesses just couldn't afford all those workers.
Wow. So even when they were trying to do right by people, it didn't always pan out.
It's a good reminder that development is complicated. You can't just throw money at a problem and expect it to go away. Got to understand each country's situation, all the nuances.
Yeah, one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
So we've got these unintended consequences, this economic dependency. What else made the alliance a tough nut to crack?
Oh, implementation was a beast in itself. Remember, this was a massive program trying to tackle all sorts of stuff across an entire continent, basically.
Right, very diverse countries, each with their own thing going on.
Exactly. Getting everyone on the same page, coordinating efforts, making sure everyone's accountable. It must have been like herding cats.
A logistical nightmare.
Totally. And in fairness to Kennedy, he did get that these were huge challenges. He even said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable.
Powerful quote.
Yeah. He knew that just having these big top-down programs wasn't enough. Real change had to be deeper, more systemic.
But did he really grasp how tough that systemic change would be?
That's where historians start throwing down.
Oh, here we go. Debate time.
Right. Some say Kennedy was, a bit naive, that he underestimated how ingrained the power structures were in Latin America, like how much resistance there would be to real reform.
And others would argue that maybe he was ignoring those roadblocks on purpose, because his main goal was always U.S. interests, not necessarily helping Latin American countries find their own footing.
Bingo. And that's why the Alliance for Progress is such a fascinating case. It's like this perfect example of how messy development can be, how foreign policy gets tangled up in it, and how the Cold War just loomed over everything.
It's like a microcosm of the whole era.
Yeah?
So bottom line, was the alliance a success, a failure, or somewhere in between?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Historians are still arguing about it. There were some wins, no doubt. Literacy rates went up in some countries, some progress on land reform, and the U.S. did invest a lot of money. But those wins often get overshadowed by what didn't work, the unintended consequences we talked about, the political games, and the fact that, at the end of the day, the power balance between the U.S. and Latin America didn't really change all that much.
Yeah, that kind of puts a damper on things.
It does, and I think that's the biggest lesson here, for me at least. The Alliance for Progress, for all its good intentions, shows the limits of this top-down approach to development. Real, lasting change has to come from within, from empowered communities, from institutions that people can trust, not just from outsiders with their own agendas.
So we've really gotten our hands dirty with the Alliance for Progress, right? Its big goals, the messy reality of how it went down, and in the end, this mixed bag of results.
Yeah, it's a complicated story for sure.
But here's the thing. It's not just some history lesson we can file away. The stuff it brings up about development, about how countries deal with each other, about power.
Right. Those are timeless.
It's all still so relevant today,
Absolutely. I think the alliance serves as this warning, a reminder that good intentions, they just aren't enough on their own. If we're serious about making a real difference in the world,
Yeah.
we got to understand how tricky development can be, how things can backfire even when you mean well. And we've got to listen to the people we're trying to help. Their voices are key.
It's like that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Uh-huh.
I always think of that.
It's so true.
You have all the money in the world, the best plans. But if you don't deal with the power imbalances, the inequality, if you don't get the context of each place,
You're setting yourself up for trouble.
right, you could end up doing more harm than good.
Exactly. And that's where all these different ways historians look at the alliance come in.
Yeah.
They give us these different perspectives, like different lenses to view the same event.
Okay, so pop quiz. Remind me of those perspectives again.
Okay, so you've got the Orthodox view, which is basically saying Kennedy was sincere, an idealist who really wanted to help Latin America.
Right, the good guy narrative.
Then there's the revisionist take, which is more simple. They argue it was all about U.S. self-interest, maintaining control.
Ah, the classic America's hidden agenda angle.
And then you've got the post-revisionists trying to find a middle ground. They say there were good intentions, sure, but also a lot of geopolitical maneuvering going on.
So a bit of both.
Exactly. And we can't forget dependency theory, which says the alliance actually made true development harder, that it just kept Latin America reliant on the U.S.
Right, because if you're always depending on someone else, you can't truly stand on your own 2 feet.
Precisely. So each of these perspectives, they offer us valuable pieces, even if none of them tell the whole story by themselves.
It's like those jigsaw puzzles, right? You need all the pieces to see the full picture.
Perfect analogy.
So how do we make sense of all these different interpretations? What lessons can we actually learn from all this?
Well, I think one big takeaway is humility. We need to admit that we don't know everything, that things can go wrong even with the best intentions, and that sometimes we just don't have all the answers.
Yeah, being open to being wrong, to changing course if things aren't working.
Exactly. And accepting that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for development. Each country, each community, they've got their own unique set of hurdles and opportunities.
It's not about imposing our ideas from the outside.
Right. It's about listening to the people who live there, respecting their knowledge, working with them to find solutions that actually fit their situation.
And that brings us to another really important point, doesn't it?
What's that?
Partnership. Real partnership, where it's not one country calling all the shots. It's got to be a two-way street built on respect, honesty, and shared goals.
Couldn't agree more. It's about empowering those communities to take charge of their own development, set their own priorities, decide their own future.
Love that. So we move away from this top-down approach where outsiders come in with their agendas, and instead it's more participatory, right? Where local communities are the ones driving the bus.
Exactly. They're in the driver's seat, deciding where they want to go.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Alliance for Progress, I'm feeling a mix of things, honestly.
Yeah, me too.
Hopeful, because progress is possible, but also cautious, because it's not guaranteed,
It's a constant process.
It takes being alert, questioning things, being willing to learn from our mistakes, and I think, most importantly, it takes understanding that we're all connected.
Yeah, that's a big one.
The problems we face, like poverty, inequality, climate change, they don't stop at borders. We can only solve them together, by sharing what we know and building a future that's fair and sustainable for everyone.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
To our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into these complex issues. Because creating a world where progress is real for everyone, that's on all of us.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings' History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.